Welcome back. Last lesson we talked a little bit about faith and content and storytelling, and now we're going to talk with Jamin Tasker, who's joined us on set. Jamin.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
You are a creative director as well at Hillsong Film and Television. First question, what is it with filmmakers and long hair?
I don't know, it's a Samson
Well, his
type
looks
thing.
shorter than what it has been in the past.
I did do a lockdown haircut, so it's definitely shorter than what it was, but it was kind of close to your length.
Look at yours.
There's strength in the hair. I don't know.
That's right. It's
about
biblical, isn't it?
It's so true.
Do you have a favorite movie or director?
It's hard to narrow down to one movie, I feel like, but I'm a big Tarantino fan for the dialogue. And Christopher Nolan, Paul Thomas Anderson, probably some favourites. I don't know, it's always hard to choose one movie, right?
So true.
Now, there's an industry for faith-based content out there, and it's sometimes criticized for having poorer quality or being too preachy. Jamin, what are your thoughts?
If you look at a past film and you think it's on the nose, sometimes the creators of some of those films can be a little too direct with their message, I feel like, without being a bit more nuanced with what they're trying to convey. They're essentially packaging a biblical concept, or they're trying to tell a sinner's journey, but they're very on the nose, perhaps, if it's a film, if it's a narrative. Whereas I believe a good film kind of sneaks past your defenses sometimes with the story. You know, it hits your heart with a beautiful story that's articulated well. So I guess with my own work, that's what I've always tried to balance, is you're always conveying a message or a theme or a topic or someone's story, but do it in a way where you can elevate it, I guess, aesthetically and artistically, and telling the story in like what you guys have said earlier, a compelling way. I think that's always the goal, rather than steering away from what could be I kind of think about it between someone staring you in the face and shouting their kind of worldview or message, or more like a debate and asking leading questions. And I think that's a biblical principle as well that you see Christ do. He asks questions of people listening to his stories. And so I think that's perhaps a stronger way when you're telling a story to pull a viewer in, is to ask questions and make them think about things. Like films that I've seen that have lasted with me for a few days after watching it are my favourite, because they've maybe touched on an idea about humanity or asked a question that I need to think about and I need to kind of consider. So I think that's kind of my driving force, is to try and create films that ask good questions.
Ben, we talked a little bit about this as well a couple of lessons ago. Is it okay to be overt? Because we do have a really important message, we believe. I mean, you've been part of creating some great, both through Hollywood and independent films lately, they're not necessarily overt in their messaging, but they're very good quality and they still strike home, and strike people's hearts. What are your thoughts on this?
Getting any film made and distributed is hard work, and knowing the audience is important. I think there's stories that we want to tell. Do they find an audience? How will those audience resonate? Because at the end of the day, when you talk about a faith-based industry, that has to be one that has box office receipts as a result of it. So, a lot of those early kind of faith-based films, they were made to be able to preach to the church congregation. They were bringing film in as an additive to what a preacher would do, on a Sunday. You fast forward to now, it's actually in Hollywood coined as the faith-based industry. It actually has its own genre now. And that's predominantly for churches, films that are for the church, if that makes sense.
Right, so in that regard, it's actually quite successful. They've set out to preach to the church, and the church has received it pretty well. Yeah,
I think it's knowing the audience that those films, and, to your question to Jamin before about poor quality, they're at times, to be able to make them commercially viable, you have to push the boat out without $20 million. And, you might find the filmmaker is a first-time filmmaker or a second-time filmmaker. And so you've got to work within those parameters, but they are geared towards a certain kind of audience. I love what Jamin said, because I think there's a lot of, right now there's a kind of this emerging generation of storytellers who have an appetite to reach the lost within theirs. And I'm not saying that people have gone before haven't had that, but there's this appetite now to kind of build that bridge into the mainstream and say, okay, do I want to create content that just satisfies the believer who's already there, they've already arrived there? Or am I trying to tell stories that connect people, with God, taking them from a zero understanding to, at least ask the questions. And it's also, I think that rather than preaching at people, to Jamin's point, you just need to create tension in their belief system. If you can create a crack in somebody's belief system, it doesn't prove, you don't have to prove that B is correct and they're believing A. You just have to show a crack in A for them to go on the journey themselves to try and discover where that truth actually is.
Jamin, any follow-up comments?
No, I think that's good. I think I guess I steer away from that, again, coming back to that idea of somebody just yelling there what they think the truth is in your face. I steer away from that and much more interested in honest dialogue. And I guess, coming back with the idea of if a film feels naff or if it feels like it hits home, I think it comes down to the honesty of the film in what it's trying to get at. If it feels forced and the characters don't feel real and they feel fake, then I think anyone can see that when they watch a film. When a character, there's nothing relatable about them, or you can't see any humanity in them, or they're typecast. Whereas the best films for me is honest depictions of humanity, and it's flawed, and it's we all go on this winding journey, and kind of capturing that in a story, I think, is the way to go. So yeah.
Right. Is it important to show that our hero has flaws, Ben?
Absolutely. Well, every hero needs to have flaws, and they need to be in a position, like I said in an earlier class, where they're yearning for something more. They have to get out of what is familiar, like we all do, right? We all find ourselves in a familiar world. It's a very safe world, but we always yearn for something more to find out purpose and meaning within our lives. So with that comes, the flaws are revealed when conflict happens and when that first hurdle or that first lesson, that you face on that journey, is kind of met. So absolutely, you can't just tell mountaintop stories. There's valleys, multiple valleys that lead you to a mountaintop experience, and it is that inner journey within. It's not always just existential crisis that gets a character through the story, through a three-act structure. It's that inner conflict. It's who am I meant to be? What needs to transform? What do I need to, as a character, what am I dying to become a truer version of myself? What do I have to overcome and find victory in that? And that's where true transformation, is found. And I think in a lot of, sometimes the failings maybe in some of the quote unquote faith-based films is that those characters don't often undergo a journey like that, because the construct of those stories really are there to deliver a message like a preacher would on a Sunday. And as long as the film story serves the plot or it serves the agenda of what's needing to be done, they often will just bypass that hero's journey or that idea of that internal change. I think they've gotten a lot better, and I think since Hollywood has understood that there is a huge market for them, and Hollywood are interested in the market, not in the message. And so as believers, we have to find ways to constantly work on our craft to be able to tell great stories. And then also balance that between the audience who may want it a little more on the nose and a little less ethereal, you know what I mean, when it comes. So it's hard. I salute anybody who actually gets a film made, raises money, has somebody who can invest and gets it distributed and can get great actors and a great director and a fantastic story and a wide audience. That is a 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10-year commitment for any individual that wants to take that on. So I think it's great to be able to just appreciate, people who have gone before and are still carving the way now. And as a ship is moving, we can always find different ways, I think, through, people like Jamin and other storytellers, like Sam and yourself even, that, are able to just to go, okay, I see where that's heading. I kind of see it a different way and not be scared to step out and go, I'm not going to like trash that because that's really helpful, but I'm just going to add my voice into this and I'm going to try and share stories the way that I see it. And the beautiful thing is everybody's journey, faith journey, life journey is so different. And the uniqueness in everybody's voice as a storyteller is so valuable. And so, I would say to people listening, like, don't think that to be successful, you have to follow your famous director's path. If Jamin just went, I want to be the next Tarantino, well, he's not, and that's not a down on his ability. He probably could create something even better, but God has given him, just like you, a unique voice and a unique storytelling style to be able to bring what he's called you to bring to the table.
That's amazing. Demi, we touched a little bit on the aesthetics of a film, and we say that story is king. So what role does beauty play? Like, how important is it that the film looks good?
Good question for Jamin.
Yeah, thinking of like my younger self and other young filmmakers out there, I think initially you are just so concentrated on the look and feel of a story you're making. Like you're like obsessing over the gear and like what camera you can get your hands on and kind of like what kind of shot you can do. And if you get too carried away with that at the sake of like telling a bad story, then that's where I see like a lot of like young filmmakers that they're putting more effort into the gear that they have rather than like what's the best way to tell this story. And I think that's a good thing to consider. Like story is the kind of main thing, and then shooting it the best way, and obviously elevating it with aesthetics is important as well. And depending on the type of film you make, depends on how you shoot that. Like if you're shooting a documentary, there's like certain rules and things. Like it's its own genre, and then if you're telling a narrative story, it's got its own kind of rules and genre of how it's been done in the past. So I think as far as aesthetics go, for me, like the best films out there have both. They've got a compelling story and incredibly like beautiful aesthetics, because like film is an art form at the end of the day. It's moving images, and so the films to me are like both of those two side by side. Again, coming back to what I said earlier, it's like it can get past your defenses. If you see something beautiful, it's hard to argue with something that's true. Beautiful and takes like gives you that sense of wonder, I guess. So I see beauty and beautiful things as opening the door to an idea, and then that's when you can come in with the idea or message you're trying to convey, and it can kind of walk through that doorway, so to speak, into someone's mind. So I always try and think of both of those things when I'm creating something, to create a sense of like transcendence or wonder for a viewer, to go like, oh wow, like, or if it's a comedy, that's a different type of thing, making a viewer laugh. You're getting past the defenses, and then you can kind of come home with what you're trying to say.
Really interesting conversation. So we're going to keep it going in lesson number 4. So we'll see you there.